Okay, I want to recognize some folks in here, elected officials and candidates. In the back of the room there, Republican State Representative Grant Worley. Jacob Meister, a candidate for Circuit Clerk here in Cook County. And an exciting young new candidate, Bill Conway, a former Naval Intelligence Officer and Assistant Cook County State's Attorney who is running for State's Attorney here in Cook County. Congratulations to all you guys and good luck. I'll introduce our panel now. Ann Ahern from Channel 5. There was a point about a year ago when I texted Ann, I go, are you the only reporter left? Because she had every scoop in town and her Twitter feed was the one to follow. Dave McKinney, who's been the hottest reporter in the last couple of months on everything corruption-wise throughout the state and the city. John Kass, I'm kidding. John Kass, one of the premier opinion writers in the United States, nationally syndicated. And some of you will remember Rob Grant, the special agent in charge when Governor Rod Blagojevich went to prison. I think he came here during Silver Shovel, so we're glad to have him. And our MC for tonight will be Ben Bradley from Channel 9 News. So Ben, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. It's fun to see this many people in a room excited to talk politics and excited and caring enough to talk about what's going on in our city and state. Pat, I don't mean to correct you on one thing. You did forget to acknowledge really the big sponsor of the evening's discussion, ComEd. Are there any lobbyists for ComEd in the room? Yeah, I was going to say, if the lights go out, we know why. We also should thank...
Were you joking or what?
No, I was joking. I know you can't... We should thank the U.S. Attorney and FBI for agreeing to an embargo for the evening so we all can be here tonight. Mr. McKinney, let's start with you. The impossible task of putting into a nutshell kind of where we've been, where we are, and how this is different from previous investigations. And if you could do it in under 18 seconds so we could put it on TV in a soundbite, that would be awesome.
Yeah, this is a little longer than that, I think. But you know what, I was thinking back, talking to somebody in the crowd here, I think the first state federal investigation I covered was under Edgar, which at that time seemed so big. It was that MSI scandal that kind of fizzled out after a while, and there's been the succession of them since then. This one has just a strange feeling to it. It feels so expansive. It started out really all in May, I think. You know, we thought Ed Burke was a big deal, but this, you know, during the month of May, consider that the feds were, you know, they raided the City Club, they raided Mike McLean's offices in Quincy. He's a high-level aide to the House Speaker, Kevin Quinn, another former Madigan aide, and then yet another close Madigan ally, former Alderman Mike Zaleski. And there seemed to be kind of a ComEd theme to all of this. And at the same time that stuff was happening, ComEd itself was being subpoenaed by a federal grand jury. And so during the course of the summer, you know, we didn't start knowing about this until probably midsummer. And then, you know, by the time we get to September, you know, it all comes out in plain view. You know, there are FBI agents carting out records and phones and things like that from State Senator Martin Sandoval's office at the Capitol. And so this is something that is, you know, the ComEd piece of it is one prong. I didn't mention the suburbs that are involved in the southwest suburbs, McCook, Summit, Lyons. And it seems like there's a common theme in both of those prongs headed towards the House Speaker's office. So that's, in a nutshell, it's not 18 seconds.
You did a great job, and I think that's what's especially interesting here is, you're right, from those of us in the media, we thought, oh my gosh, they have Ed Burke. But then it keeps going and keeps going. John, can you bring in just this notion that this investigation does not appear to have stopped with one big fish, and it does not appear to have stopped just at Chicago City Hall or just at the state capitol in Springfield?
Yeah, I'm waiting for the Republicans. So far, we've only had Democrats, but eventually, I would hope, I don't hope or wish ill will on anyone, but I've just got a feeling that there's got to be Republicans in here somewhere. Orenda Troutman years ago, anybody, you guys remember Orenda Troutman? famous alderman from the 20th Ward who said famously on tape, I think this fellow was responsible for that, all politicians are hoes. I don't think all politicians are hoes, but it is interesting, isn't it, that after years of plucking low-hanging fruit, what we're looking at is, to my mind, a massive RICO investigation that's not just stopping at the ripe fruit on the first branch. So all power to them, and let's see what happens.
Marianne, are you seeing a different reaction than we have in years past when people associated with the big power brokers, the Ed Burkes, the Mike Madigans, et cetera? There used to be this feeling, I think, of Teflon, right? Oh, this is one bad apple. We don't know this guy. Are you seeing a different reaction as you circle back for responses to all this?
Well, first of all, I don't think we would have Mayor Lightfoot had there not been Ed Burke. I just really do not think that would have happened. We didn't see it coming, certainly. And, just as Dave was going through the list back in May, I was on my way to a story somewhere in the south suburbs, and someone gave me a call about Martin Sandoval. You know, you're off on a story, and they said, I think you need to go to Cicero. You know what I mean? You're just like, you're halfway to, there's another raid at another place, and it turned out that they were at all of his home, his office, at Springfield. So, yeah, as far as the responses, there are those who are willing to respond and tell you how they feel, but there's so many who are nervous. Everybody's lawyered up, They're all afraid, what's next? And we didn't even get into John Cullerton yet, but I really doubt that he's resigning to spend more time with family. That didn't work out for Michael Jordan, did it? Remember that one? I'm gonna do the carpool. Yeah, no, I don't think so.
Yeah. We need to come up with all the PR people in the room need to come up with a better response and spending more time with our families, right? Everybody knows what that means. But from a media perspective, Marianne, you made a great point, is with Lori Lightfoot in the mayor's seat, how it worked for us journalistically is suddenly we have somebody who advances the story in a way that didn't happen in the past. So Ed Burke's office raided. We don't yet know what this is about. Mayor, is this acceptable? In years past, the response would have been, well, we don't really know. We got to wait and see, blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden, you have the mayor of the city of Chicago saying, no, he shouldn't be there. For her own reasons, but it from a journalism perspective, accelerates the story, and I think in a way that we hadn't seen before. All right, now the big question to the former FBI special agent in charge, Rob Grant. These investigations and what we all know about them are the iceberg sticking out of the water. I wonder if you, just based on having a sense of the cadence of how this works, how big is the actual iceberg under the water?
Well, it could either be a floating small iceberg or a very big iceberg. It's hard to say. It's hard to say whether the searchers are tied to other investigations. Sometimes you tactically execute a search for the sole purpose of stimulating conversation and see where those conversations go. Usually that's in furtherance of a wiretap of some kind. So I don't know in this case what it is, but when we did Family Secrets, as you recall during the trial testimony, some of the evidence used in that case dated all the way back to the late 60s. So there's an accumulation and a pile of pieces of information, let's put it that way, that maybe the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office acts upon or doesn't act upon for many years. And sometimes it takes some small break to make sense of very old pieces of information.
But for people who have been watching politics in this town for decades, many might say, what took so long? So to you, what does take so long? Meaning, it's not new that politicians are profiting from their personal law firms, that people feel pressured to use one guy over another.
Well, you don't have you need solid evidence. You got to charge a case, and you're not going to charge a case out of the U.S. Attorney's Office until you have a pretty good chance you're going to win that case. So you may have information of corruption, but you don't have any direct piece of evidence. And give you an example of one of our former governors. You know, we had a cooperating witness who came in with his attorney and said, you know, this is what's happening in the state of Illinois, which we already knew, but it was the first person to actually walk in the door and say, I'm a victim of this activity. So the natural reaction was, would you cooperate with us? Well, I am. I'm here with my attorney, aren't I? Well, no, would you cooperate a little more proactively with us? And he's, absolutely not. I have to work in this state. And if I am ever seen to be a cooperator wearing a wire, I'll never work again in this state. That conversation took place contemporaneous with another important piece of information. Those two pieces of information is what led to enough information to get a search warrant to install microphones on Blagojevich. But he walked in the door. He was only willing to go so far, but no further. And oftentimes that's the case. I can tell you, Watergate was the same way. If you go back and research the people that were interviewed in Watergate, a lot of them were very scared. And they were very angry at the FBI because everything they were writing was showing up in the Washington Post with Woodward and Bernstein. So there was a leak inside the FBI, and they were assured this was confidential. So,
I'd like. Can I ask a question?
Oh, yeah.
I'd like. Rob Grant was chief of the Chicago office of the FBI for many years. He mentioned Family Secrets, which was probably the most significant organized crime investigation in the city's history. And I'm wondering, Rob, how do you think, if this is a RICO, what we're looking at now, how does that work? How does it work in court? How does it work among the investigators? How does it play out? Not the details of what will happen, but I mean, how do RICOs actually work inside the office?
well, you better ask Randy Sanborn. He's in the office here somewhere, but
Our running joke with him was push one for no comment.
That's right.
When he was at the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Right.
Yeah, so the concept of a RICO in the simplest terms is you have predicate offenses that you can utilize, and then you can identify a corrupt organization. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it's too complicated for a jury, and it causes problems in deciding the outcome of a trial. So when a prosecutor is going forward, they have to assess, is this jury able to accept a complex argument? Can they put all these pieces together? And that's one of the challenges when you start adding up RICO. A lot of it is the storytelling, how clearly you tell that story. And there are people that argue that RICO was designed for a different type of criminal element, maybe not necessarily supposed to be applied in these other areas. We've heard that argument before as well.
You took down a sitting governor. People always want to know what are the politics of that, meaning between the FBI and approval in Washington, et cetera. Can you walk through just who needed to sign off on that and how that went down?
Well, it has to be signed off by the Department of Justice, has to be signed off by FBI headquarters. They go up two different chains, so Pat Fitzgerald ran it up through his chain, I ran it up through my chain. Chicago U.S. Attorney's Office, Chicago FBI has a very long history of success and crossing T's and dotting I's, so there was never any resistance in either quarter towards what we were trying to do. Now, if we were a small office that had never done anything like this before, there might be more circumspection of what was in there. But I was an FBI agent for 29 years. I've never known politics out of the department to interfere, except in one case, in any type of request for authority for a wiretap or something like that.
And what would that one be?
I can't tell you that one, because the corrupt politician still sits up there in Washington, D.C., and every time I look at him, my stomach turns.
Dun, dun, dun. We're going to get to your questions in just a minute, so start thinking about them. Dave, I wonder for you, your take on John Cullerton's sudden departure and whether that in and of itself and the fear we are seeing breaks the logjam.
When I heard that on Thursday he had delivered that news to his caucus behind closed doors, I probably heard about it maybe a half hour after it happened, but my first message to his press office was, is he under investigation? And, you know, the answer I got back was, well, I knew you were going to ask that question, but the answer is no. And, you know, for right now, I think we have to kind of take him at that word. I mean, we don't have any evidence that Cullerton is a target of anything, but you can see that, you know, he's in the same kind of position that Madden is. They've got, you know, this ability to influence all kinds of legislation. I mean, you know, there's been so much focus on ComEd and what their agenda was. I mean, that had to go through the Senate as well. I think that, you know, we haven't seen the footprints of the feds yet around him either, you know, with subpoenas or certain raids or things like that. That would be a tell-all sign. So I think with Cullerton, you'll just have to kind of wait and see.
What would you say, what about his caucus? I mean, we now have,
That's something.
I mean, whether it's Terry Link, who has been wired up, we have Sandoval, we have his distant cousin. You know, it isn't that far to take the leap that perhaps there's a problem here, whether or not he's saying it or not yet.
Right, and you know, this is all happening when one party has got like a supermajority control over things,
Yeah.
and an ability to kind of just dictate everything. And I think part of this, honestly, is, you know, I think government, I mean, the Rauner experience kind of maybe wouldn't embody that because we had conflict there so much. But I think our system works better when we have a ruling party and an opposition party, and both of them are functioning. And right now, the Republican Party, just by virtue of its numbers here, they don't have the numbers to really block anything or to influence things. And so I think that then gives, you know, the majority party here power to do all kinds of things. And I mean, I just can't imagine what those caucuses are like when you got this guy over there and this one over there and this one over there, you know, with marks on their back.
How hard is it to wire up a sitting state senator? I don't mean the physical process.
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Now, you're talking about a body recorder, a wiretap, a microphone, they all
I'm not
represent...
talking about the physical apparatus. I'm talking about the fact that you got a state senator who's walking around recording his colleagues.
Is that a recorder in your pocket, or are you happy to see me? Something
It's a
like
lot easier today. In my beginning of my career, we had these big things called NAGRAs, and I remember when you show it to somebody, it's as big as an old VCR cassette player, and their eyes would bug out, and they'd start sweating, and it was always a challenge to calm them down and realize this. But today's technology makes it a heck of a lot easier to conceal.
I don't mean the physical aspect of it.
okay.
I mean, he's a sitting state senator, whoever he may be.
The department has certain rules regarding sensitive areas. A member of the media, clergy, lawyers, things of that nature that escalates approval processes. But a state senator wouldn't trigger any of those that I recall. They're no different than, well, you're a member of the media, no different than me, a private citizen. There are sensitivities involved just because it's politics, and you always have to be concerned about a couple of things. One, you don't want it to get out that you're conducting an investigation of a politician who you may turn out to exonerate because it damages them almost forever. Famous case of Ray Donovan winning his trial in New York and saying, where do I go to get my reputation back? So the department's very sensitive about that. So when you deal with public officials, you're much more sensitive as to who knows about the case, who knows about the activity, just so you don't have the inadvertent disclosure to some of my colleagues to the left who would love to report that. So it's, I would say the sensitivity is only in the context of how you could damage somebody's reputation should the investigation prove unfruitful and it still gets out.
The flip side, though, is the infamous moment where a U.S. attorney vouched for a governor of the state of Illinois, George Ryan, saying, no, he's not the topic or the focus of our investigation.
Well, I never liked the idea of anybody talking about who is or is not a target. You know, if you look at what the FBI has collected over the years just in the state of Illinois, you'd probably not be too surprised about who's been under investigation that's never been revealed. You know, that kind of collection process goes on all the time. But to go back to, you know, for example, when Jim Comey did his press conference on Hillary Clinton, that's one of the serial issues of debate amongst many people as to she was, according to him, exonerated. which usually would mean you don't say anything. But for whatever reason, Jim felt he had to do it. For whatever reason, he thought the department was compromised and felt he needed to do that.
One more question from the Big Mouth TV guy before we go to your questions. John and Marianne, I wonder your thoughts. In the past, when these investigations have clipped a variety of politicians or aides, et cetera, they're like gremlins or tribbles. You know, they just, somebody new comes and just replaces them of equal ethical fortitude. Do you see it being different now? You know, we're going to get a new Senate president. We're going to get some new people here under the harsh light of an ethics debate.
If, let's speculate here, that a lot of this looks like it's headed toward Mike Madigan. All right? Everybody in the media has been talking that way. We've been touching our stories that way. No charges have been filed against him. No accusations have been made. But you see the rings tightening. The politics of this is if Mike Madigan has been told by his friends for years, why don't you just retire? They told that to Eddie Burke too. Just retire. But if you retire, what are you? Just an old Irish guy with a lot of money. And they love the action. So you see the takedown of Eddie Burke now, right? Franny was writing today about how his hair's long in the back, you know, like a ducktail or something. And I'm reminded of Dean Bauer. I think Eddie Jensen had Dean Bauer. And Dean Bauer would show, he was the guy with Ryan, and he showed up in court with, every day he had a bigger neck size of a shirt, so he was shrinking in his shirts. And you had the feeling the guy was dying. Well, then I remember, Betty knows, I was out there in the middle of the rain at the halfway house where he was at, and he was tossing up car keys on his way to the car, going golfing. I said, "Hi, Dean," and he's like, "Hey, how are?" Oh, and then he started shrinking. So with Madigan, if he goes, this will be like Illinois politically will be like Yugoslavia after Tito, because you're going to have all these different factions. I mean, one thing he's really good at is keeping people in line. He's very disciplined, and if he goes, you're going to see a lot of grabbing. It'll be quite attractive.
Marianne, do you think it'll be a bit like Chicago after Daley or Rahm? All of a sudden, it's this free-for-all?
Well, I do think that we've seen a different city council, and but you know, we still have several of the aldermen who are under investigation besides Ed Burke and perhaps a couple of more. But we have definitely seen a different city council today than what we've had over the last 10, 20 years that I've been covering it, and I think it'll be interesting in the months ahead. Well, most certainly just to get the mayor's budget through. How is that? Are they all going to fall in line as they've done for so many years, that there's only 2 or 3 that speak up and in the end they all cave? Or will there be some debate? Because this is a new group of progressives that are there. So yeah, it has definitely changed the scenery of City Hall. Yeah.
Well, Dave checks his email to make sure no one else has been raided or charged. What questions do you guys have? Raise your hand. We'll get a microphone over to you. Oh, here's the microphone. Are you going to really tell me no one has questions? Kristen McQuarrie. All righty, I'll keep going. Think about those questions. Oh,
wait,
well, you know, Kristen
wait.
has a question.
Wait, before Kristen speaks, it's Kristen McQuarrie, the great columnist at the Chicago Tribune, my colleague on the editorial board, and to all my friends on the editorial board who came for support. I love you guys. But Kristen had a great column a couple days ago, and she asked, what name do we give to this investigation, like Operation what? Happy Endings, what do you call it? And I'd like Rob Grant, what name do you give it?
No comment on that one. And
Okay.
Is there a name? Would there be a name at this point?
Did he actually reveal that he's got somebody in the audience to give him a question that he wants to have? Is that what that was all about?
That's collusion.
But out of curiosity, Rob, would there be a name at this point? We just don't know it.
There might be a name, yeah. So it depends on how many people are in the investigation and what the nature of the investigation is. It might be Operation whatever, so they don't have to put all the names. What's that?
Lights Out. That's a good one. Anyone else got a good one? I liked Fallen Apple. It was a little obscure, but Operation Happy Ending is probably the winner. Kristen.
So actually my question is for Mr. Grant. As a reporter covering all of this, we just always wonder if it is it true, given resources of various levels of government office, that really only the feds have the resources to take these on? Or is there some justification in the impatience of the electorate that there isn't state's attorney involvement, attorney general involvement, that there isn't more law enforcement involvement leading up to the point where the feds swoop in?
Well, it's a multi-part response. So the feds have some of the tools that state authorities do not have. And they have a very good U.S. Attorney's Office, and you're in Chicago, so you have a long history here of successful prosecution of corruption cases. So when an assistant U.S. attorney comes into the U.S. Attorney's Office, when I used to run the corruption squad, you had to beat them off with a stick. And that's not a bad thing. It's just they're so anxious to get involved in corruption because that's what this U.S. Attorney's Office is known for. Other areas of investigation, maybe you have to beat them with a stick to get them to prosecute. It's not a reflection on the U.S. Attorney's Office, just that there's been a brand here with the U.S. Attorney's Office where this is where they've made their bones, and they're willing to take on risks and do things and support things and be aggressive in things that another U.S. Attorney's Office, where I have been elsewhere, where they wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. Cases that you would minor level assistant U.S. attorney would prosecute in another place or here, another U.S. Attorney's Office, because of the politics of the U.S. attorney, wouldn't touch it. So Chicago is served very well by the U.S. Attorney's Office here. I can tell you that's not the case everywhere. Second piece of that is, resource-wise, there's a lot of latitude to the agent in charge here to drive resources where they need to go. And when I was here, I had a good director in Bob Mueller, and he was very supportive of corruption. He did not play politics at all, and it was pretty much, no matter where it goes, drive it. So I think that's part of it. But part of it is we have the authorities, the wiretaps, the trust of the courts to do things like that. I always wondered when I was here why the Attorney General of the state of Illinois and other prosecuting officials never tackled the corruption that was so endemic in this area. And I never got a straight answer. Part of it was selfish. We didn't want them to do it because we had so much fun doing it ourselves. U.S. Attorney's Office wanted to make sure they didn't have to deconflict with a state's attorney's office, and sometimes we've had to. But there's a very low level of desire, it appears to me, in the state of Illinois and in Cook County to actually take on this particular crime problem in this city and in this state. And it's left to the feds to do that job. Part of it is tools, part of it is will and determination, and I have yet to see it, quite frankly, in the state of Illinois and in Cook County.
Thank you. So we've heard a lot about the Madigan investigation as it's been framed, although it seems like there's a number of different investigations going on, whether we're talking about, in my case, I'm interested in the Dorothy Brown investigation into the clerk of the court's office. We've got investigation into, Victor Reyes's name has been thrown out, former HDO, and it seems like there's a whole tree of people involved there. There's been property tax issues, whether it's Berrios and Burke, and we've got the gambling industry most recently being brought into it with the video games through Arroyo and Berrios connections. Are these all connected, or are they separate, independent investigations?
That's a great question, Jacob. We don't know yet, and the only clues we have are these search warrants. And what's significant, I think, probably the one, the suburban ones that we saw were revealing. I mean, they sort of revealed kind of a garden variety corruption going on in a lot of those towns where you had, the mayors having home security systems or new air conditioners put on their homes. The Sandoval search warrant, though, had all of these factors. I mean, it included, it included Rick Hyden, the video gambling. It had, the paving magnate out in the western suburbs, Mike
Fondra.
And so you get that, and you get this stuff involving Exelon and ComEd and rate hikes, and it's just all over the map. And so, what's interesting in all of that, we don't see Madigan's name mentioned, but we do see the building blocks for something potentially that could lead to them. But look, the whole thing is we have basically one criminal case that kind of happened in the midst of this, and that's Luis Arroyo. But we don't have like a clear-cut sense yet of how he fits into it all. I mean, the gambling part of it, yes, but is he part of the bigger, ComEd piece of this? We don't know yet. I mean, his daughter-in-law works there, but it's still, it's still probably weeks or months away.
I'd suggest you take one of those, like that crazy woman on Homeland, Carrie. Like she's
Carrie
got
Matheson,
that,
yes.
Yeah, Carrie Matheson. She's got that board with all the,
Yeah.
photographs.
So
and
do
then
serial
yarn.
killers, yeah.
It's called, I forget the technical term for this.
Why are you looking at me?
Because there's a technical term for it. There's some kind of dial. I don't know what. Can't remember the technical.
Well, and then we've heard Jim DeLeo's name again. I mean, we haven't heard of DeLeo.
Oh, I didn't ask the Jimmy DeLeo question yet. But
I mean, how many years has that been? He resigned.
we have to ask
5 or
Rob
6
this.
years.
Rob would know. When you arrested, I'm sorry, I'm doing your job, Ben. and I'm
Doing
not-
a great. You just forgot the Jimmy
When you
DeLeo
arrested-
D. How you doing?
I don't know.
When you arrested Rod Blagojevich, he famously said that he thought, when you called and said federal agents are coming in, he thought it was Jimmy DeLeo joking. So can you take us back to that practical joke moment? What did he really say?
No, that's not true, John. No, I don't want to belabor the Rod Blagojevich thing. It's like
This is the great. You're going to be telling this in 30 years. I've heard this story, and I want to hear it again.
Yeah.
I know, he's ruining it.
How many times do I got to tell the Rod Blagojevich story? So no, we called the state's emergency line, figured he'd probably answer that phone, and that's the phone that we didn't have a wiretap on. So that was probably the most. 6 o'clock in the morning, we were going to get him up, but he never answered it. So I had to call a cell phone, knowing he'd answer that, and also knowing that we were wiretapping at the same time. So I had to be very careful what I said, but that's how that worked
Okay.
out. But there was no DeLeo conversation.
I think he thought he related that story from his point of view, but I haven't talked to him and don't anticipate talking to him for another 10 years or so. So
I don't know, man.
I don't know.
Crazier
Maybe Trump
things have
lets him go.
happened.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, crazier things have happened. Any other questions?
Just compounding on your question, I mean, is not the common denominator the party of affiliation for all these politicians? And I guess the question being, is the absence of a robust Republican Party in the state or some third party the true cause of why this gets so rampant, why it's so prolific, why it goes so deep, and why it's so consistent?
I think Dave said it well at the beginning, that yes, it's when you have no check and balance, who is keeping an eye and who is sort of questioning, wait, you want to expand gambling where, and what are you going to do, and what is this all about? Oh yeah, why not? Let's just go for it. Yes, I mean, clearly.
But the other part of it that doesn't get mentioned is the shrinking pool of reporters. I mean, that's as big of a factor, if not bigger, because anything you have to do is go into the basement of the Capitol these days and look at all the empty desks. And we've seen studies all over the place that when your local newspaper shrinks up and dies, corruption rises in its place. And so that's a big problem. We used to have, dozens of people covering state politics. We still had corruption, but at least there were more eyes and ears that are not there now.
I think your question was about the lack of the Republican response, correct? I referenced the Family Secrets case early, the great case that Rob and his people and Teddy McNamara and the organized crime. task force and great prosecutors put together. There cannot be, my theory's always been, there cannot be organized crime without direct help from local law enforcement and politics. I mean, that's how the outfit worked for years. I assume that's how the Mexican cartels will work if they're not already working that way. But to the Republican Party, years ago, Colonel McCormick and others demanded that the president send them prosecutors to go after Al Capone and his crew. So, and then Dave McKinney recently with Dan Michalopoulos and BEZ, and I'm not trying to compare the two, but they did a piece on gaming in which prominent Democrats and Republicans, right? Did I miss that piece? I got it right? Were involved in the gaming industry making a lot of money, millions, and they're not talking about it. Well, maybe it's not part of this investigation, but it should be known and discussed because this nexus, this combine between machine Democrats and white shoe Republicans has been a deal for 40 years, and it's been Mike Madigan as the beneficiary. And that's why, I mean, how many people are not leaving the state? Everyone's staying here, right? You're all staying. Okay.
It was many years ago you coined the phrase the combine to refer to it. For a long time, it almost seemed like party mattered less than power and proximity to power. You had big business, traditionally Republican, giving big money to big Democrats to get what they wanted.
Dave mentioned the point, it's just a second ago. Bill Cellini, the boss of the Republican Party, for years, the boss of Thompson, the boss of Edgar, the boss of Bob Scholander, the boss of, going to, with Tony Rezko, according to their trial, to the Bush White House for Christmas parties. That was nice, and back and forth. You know what? George Ryan goes away for how many years? 6. Bill Cellini goes away for a baseball season, I think. Just a baseball season.
I had a Dean Bauer moment with him in Springfield.
Really?
It was kind of funny. We were at Sam's Club, and there Bill Cellini is. It's right at the same point where he's going in front of a federal judge, and his lawyers are saying, I'm too ill to stand trial. And their bill is, man, he's just looking healthy. He's out shopping for steaks. He looks like he's ready to roll.
Did he have that Julius Caesar haircut working? Yeah.
I will say this much. You're fortunate in Chicago, having worked in a lot of different cities in the United States, you still have a robust media market here, even if it's diminished over time. And that makes such a difference when it comes to corruption. I've been in one newspaper towns that barely even have one reporter covering politics. And it's not that the FBI monitors the media, but the FBI reads the paper and reads a lot of things because things come out of there that are important. So as media diminishes, I think that oversight, if you don't have a robust two-party system, you're in trouble of having endemic corruption and never get it detected.
I'll throw one out. You had, we have the Sandoval red light camera story, right? That investigation. A couple weeks ago, and then you have the Madigan Electric stuff. Well, that's what I call it. A couple of weeks ago or days ago, I found a nexus between, in which a senior vice president at Exelon is married to Nikki Zoller, or is it Nikki Zoller at the red light camera? Do I have it right? And I'm waiting to see if other people are going to pick up on it. Because I see something like that, I'm like, spider sense, you know what I mean? It's just like, it gets me going.
John, it's a coincidence there's a wall. It's in my professional ethics manual that I've written myself and will not be sharing publicly.
All right, Mr. Bradley.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So, as has been alluded to, this investigation, so-called, you have on the one side, and I'll put it aside from the question to make clear what I'm putting aside, the shakedowns of Burke and the bribery of Arroyo, just your standard fraud, theft, public corruption. and it's just petty stuff, okay? And the gaming stuff, petty stuff. And then you got the big stuff, it seems to me, which is the Exelon thing. I mean, I recruited Ann Ahern actually into, so I know something about Ann, because I recruited her there 20 years ago as a low-level in-house counsel. And then the rest, everybody knows what happened there.
Chris,
But the question is, could you folks put this together? Because you got four of the best there. So if you put together the politics, the policy, and whatever, always forgetting the third thing, politics, policy, and just the institutional setup here. What is it? I know it requires speculation, but here's what we know about Exelon. Yeah, the question. We know Ann Ahern's resigned, so there's something big there, okay? We know McLean was not bugged, he was wiretapped. Is that the word? Whatever. I got corrected earlier. Whatever he was, okay? And we know Madigan's a big confidant of McLean. And we know they got lots of favorable legislation in the last decade, but it's easy, it's legal, just give contributions. And the last thing I'll say, so take all of those things, take Jay Doherty and the City Club and $3 million to Jay, but most of it as a lobbyist, the consulting fees. What would you speculate? Was Exelon giving out a lot of money that wasn't getting reported, and that's the violation? That seems
let me answer your question. All you have to do is go into the Chicago Tribune of, when was it, Kristen? Last week? Kristen McQuarrie wrote a column, I think it was One Dirty Day. Did I get the headline right? Something like that? It's about the Exelon ComEd lobbying, protecting the two giant nuclear plants, the rates that went up, DuQuoin and Quad Cities, I think, right? And that's just one aspect of this larger investigation.
That bill, though, that was a really cool piece.
It was a great piece.
But 2016, it was May 30, or no, it was not May, it happened in November of that year. And that bill was over 500 pages long. And plops down, as is typical there, on the final day of session, there are 10 House amendments that all get acted on that day. And nobody knows what the heck they're voting. Nobody. And there's some complicity with the press too, because we're trying to keep track of a million different things going on at the same time. But that had that provision in there that was like $200 million plus a year in subsidies.
As if by design.
And plants for 10 years.
As if by design. All those bills came in, I mean, the amendments came in and the changes came in. But you know what? One guy knows. The Speaker of the House knows. The Senate President knew. They knew because they were briefed on it by their people who were making those deals, or making those moves, sorry. Deals, wrong word.
It's fascinating. I mean, what all of this is doing is kind of like opening the curtain a little bit on what a powerful entity does to pass legislation. I mean, we've always traditionally focused on campaign contributions. That's a thing. Who gets hired as a lobbyist? Many of these people are former Madigan staffers who wind up being in key positions, ex-lawmakers as well, members of the caucus. And then there's a whole other component that deals with, internally at ComEd and so on. People getting hired who are relatives of legislators, and then contractors being hired who also have ties to different legislators. That's a whole other realm of legislative favoritism that happens that is not out in public view.
I'm just thinking of the eyes of the jury as this, if it ever gets there, under those fluorescent lights, like Jim Zagel's courtroom or something, right, Marianne? And the U.S. Attorney begins to explain the legislative process, and our eyes start glazing, and their eyes start glazing. It speaks to what Rob, I think, was talking about just a few minutes ago. When you have a very complicated, layered case, you have to make it, right?
I'll never forget covering City Treasurer Miriam Santos's trial, and at one point, they're in the weeds on this like complex city finance stuff, and I look over, and it's a jury of your peers. It's the people you pass on the CTA every day, and I look over, one lady's closing her eyes, and I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this is our system, right? We're expecting people to understand complex stuff, and we're giving them this power based solely on the fact that they're Joe Average, who should, that's a great scenario, and it's also a scary scenario. And I remember thinking if I were Miriam Santos in that moment, I'd be scared. Let's get to predictions. Is that scary? I don't want to know who's getting whacked. I mean, I'd love to know.
Who's getting whacked?
I'm trying to talk like I would if I read a John Kass column.
Like, I don't.
So in the Fulton Market District, which used to be home to meat packers, they're running out of butcher paper because they're putting so much of it in Chicago City Hall. How did I do?
That's good.
Yeah, feel free to use it.
I hope no one gets whacked.
You know what I mean.
But I would like to see a lot of indictments, and I can't wait. And one thing about this, though, there's going to be collateral damage. There always is in a big investigation. Sometimes there are going to be people who are going to get ground up in this, who had just a small, tiny aspect, and they will get ground up because they played the game the way it was set. And the people who set the game and profited by it for years are all gone. And the money is all gone, And I know it's coming, and I know that there are people we know that are going to get ground up in this, and I do feel a little queasy about it because these are human. It's not, look at Mitch Trubisky. They're pulling the wings off this fly. He's just a 22-year-old kid. But there are other people who are political who are going to get squashed, I think.
So Rob, based on what you've seen, not any inside information that you may have from talking to former colleagues, but do you think, have a full picture of the extent of the criminality that is being investigated?
Let me preface it by saying I have not talked to anybody, and I've been gone for 7 years, and I would deliberately not ask Ted McNamara, who's now working corruption, or some of the others that I know anything about this for the very reason that I knew you'd ask me that question. But it would be my guess, based on my experience, that there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. Just don't know yet. And there's not enough out there to know how deep it goes and how far it goes.
Rob, I have a question for you, though, about the recordings. I mean, if this thing is going all the way to the top, I mean, how vital is it for whoever that end person is to be caught on a recording in order to persuade a jury of guilt?
Well, there's nothing more compelling than listening to somebody's own voice talk about the corruption they're involved in. That's the number one piece of evidence that everybody tries to get, but you don't always get that. Doing a wiretap is very labor intensive. There's a lot of oversight. You have to go before the chief judge to get a wiretap. You got to demonstrate to the judge that you've exhausted all other means that are not as intrusive as a wiretap to get authority for that wiretap. Once you get that wiretap up, you have to minimize it, which means you might get conversations about taking the kids to the soccer game and Aunt Betty's birthday party. Those all have to be minimized. And you can only collect on the relevant things that are relevant to the investigation. Then you got to do 10-day reports to the court to make sure you're not carrying on your wiretap any longer than is absolutely necessary. So nobody goes into a wiretap without eyes wide open about the burden, the oversight, the threshold. So it's a prime piece of evidence, but it isn't done easily, and it isn't done without a lot of thought.
But they did put Madigan on tape at the beginning of this thing. With Danny Solis set up a meeting, Madigan beautifully went to Chinatown, of all places, to help it, a hotel, or talk about it. And just the fact that the federal authority put that on federal paper was like, we always say bombshell, okay? And usually it's not bombshells. But to me, that was like a declaration, because they knew it. Federal investigators and the lawyers know when they do something like that, what that means. And it was like, we're coming. We're coming.
And Rob, you said earlier, sometimes those warrants and whatnot, you know they're going to become public. They're written in a way to spark some conversations that you all may be listening to, though one would have to believe some people are smart enough to have figured that out in advance, no?
Yeah, sometimes if you have a strategy of an investigation, sometimes specific charges or specific warrants are utilized to further the case. Sometimes they're held in the back room until you're ready, and then maybe you've got a wire. This goes on in drug cases all the time. You're not getting any productive wire, so you do something to stimulate the conversation, and that may be an interview, a tactical interview of somebody who you may realize is going to go back, and then you watch and see where all the rats go for guidance. So that could be part of it, or it could just be we're going to build this case one brick at a time, brick by brick by brick.
You know, if you have somebody who doesn't use a cell phone, in the
Hypothetically, yes.
You have talked about some of the tactics that are used, you know, to get around that problem. And you mentioned an organized crime case that you were involved in.
Well, I wasn't involved in, but you know, when John Gotti was head of the Gambino crime family in New York, organized crime is notoriously suspect of any kind of conversation, whether it be a cell phone, a home phone, their house they all assume they're being bugged. So they talk in code. That came out in Family Secrets because there was a code in their dialogue.
I don't want to be no chumbalone.
But Gotti would go to his private club, and what was noticed by the New York agents was that whenever he wanted to have a meaningful conversation, he wouldn't have it in the club because he presumed there's a microphone in there. He'd walk down the street, and he walked down the street with Sammy the Bull Gravano, who ended up being a government witness. So what they noticed was he was walking by parking meters on the street, so we mic'd all the parking meters. So that's how we captured that conversation. And that was, you know, how long's John Gotti been? That was 25 years ago, I think. So those kinds of creative applications of technology can be utilized. And it's not impossible, but some targets are harder than others, no question about it.
But when you say that there's still so much time, it makes us say, wait a second. When the raids at Sandoval, the Arroyo, I mean, it gives us the impression that it's coming around the corners quickly. You know, the Friday before Thanksgiving, or the Friday before Christmas, or whatever that is, that used to be a notorious time of some kind of indictment being announced. I mean, really, you see this going years, or are we really getting closer to some kind of announcement?
Marion, I can't answer that question. My guess would be it's less likely that it was used as a tactic. So, for example, sometimes you have a wire that's going nowhere, and you run the risk of it, and so you do something to stimulate the wire. Sometimes it's a desperate act. Sometimes it's an effort to preserve evidence because somebody somewhere has gotten information, and you worry that critical pieces of information are going to be lost, so you have to execute maybe prematurely. It's hard to say in this case where we are in the investigation.
But you could have a case where maybe you not get what you need, and then all of a sudden it turns out that Terry Link is, who was on the ethics committee, of course, is on a wire. At least it was reported by the Tribune as such. He denies it. And you can imagine conversations among others before Terry, you know, on the other stuff, to Terry, if he had been wired, like, Terry, what do you make of all this stuff, man? I don't know, Johnny.
Terry is, I still can't get my arms around the Terry Link thing because, you know, the Tribune sometimes both identified him as the senator who was not named.
And good reporters both.
But then, you know, that night, Terry, I texted him and he called me back. And
Yeah.
the level of intensity in that guy's voice, I mean, I guess, you know, if he really was wearing a wire, I wouldn't maybe expect him to say, yeah, I was wearing a wire. But the intensity of his denials, really, I'm still struck by that.
I'm struck by how does that work, Rob, where you're on the federal bus and then you get off for a while and then you come back on? Please, can I come back on? Or would you like to come back on? Get off, come back on. How does that, like, do you need a transfer? Or how does it work?
I don't know how to answer that one, John.
It's the kind of thing I would ask him in the corridor.
Usually somebody
knowing
who's-
he's not going to answer it anyways.
Somebody who's involved in corruption who's been approached by the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI who believes they've been had, one of the requirements for any kind of favorable treatment before a sentencing judge is that they divulge everything they've got. There is no free pass. And sometimes when somebody's been approached and they have a piece of evidence, the object isn't them, the object is somebody else.
Right.
And to get their head around cooperating it, their life is suddenly flashed before their eyes. Everything everybody knew about them is going to crash. It takes a while for them to process that. Some people it's a lot easier. They just flip up right overnight. But other people, like the one in Blagojevich, he said, I'd never be able to work in this state again if I was ever found out to have worn a wire, and I have to live here, so I'm not wearing a wire.
I remember Jim Lasky, the city
And
clerk, saying...
he's still working.
I don't know.
I remember Jim Lasky, the city clerk, saying, nah, I'm going to fight this, and then walking into a conference room with his attorney at 219, and they played the tapes for him that they had him on, and that was when he decided,
Yeah.
no, they got me.
What do you think happened when they played the tape of, what ward is this? Where are we, in the West Loop? Is this the 25th ward? Yeah, it is, right? When they played, what?
27.
27? Oh, damn it. If it only had been the 25th.
That would have been good.
Like, what do you think went on in that room, Rob? You've been in
moving over
those
there
rooms.
now?
I move around.
You've been in those rooms
Like a mole.
before where you've got an alderman and then you play the tape about the massage parlors, the Asian girls, the happy endings, the Viagra, and you see a guy just kind of collapse. I don't know.
What are you asking me, John?
What's it like in there? What's it like in there when you press that tape and that guy knows he cannot go, there's nowhere he's going except maybe to church after this?
Wiretaps can be terribly boring. They can be terribly revealing. You never know what's going on in somebody's private life that you had no insight to before that. So the thing about it is the courts require you to minimize. So even though you want to listen to the sultry conversation that's about to go across that wiretap, you got to turn it off.
And my last question here, which of the three of us and Kristen use these quotes in our next stuff? Right? Probably all.
Let me ask you about the timing of Sandoval Arroyo. Intentional? Is that a strategy on the FBI's part? Is that, I mean, are you guys gaming out all of these moves, intending to send a message? We've talked a little bit about it, I know.
You asking me?
Yeah? No, you're the only one up there with federal experience.
I don't want to speculate because I don't know.
Okay.
It could be independent of each other. It could be timed. It's not about sending a message because once you've gone public with something, you're under the gun to prove it because you've damaged somebody's reputation with even the execution of a search warrant. So you've got to have your ducks in a row at that point. So I wouldn't want to speculate. I think that would be unfair to the agents in the U.S. Attorney's Office.
You know, Rob, to go back, I'm not sort of fixated on the recording piece of this. When you and I talked for this podcast, public official ed, if you're looking for that, we had Pam Davis, the hospital executive out in Naperville, who was one of the early informants that investigation had, and she had a recording device in her bra, and to hear her tell that story is something else. But can you talk a little bit about the kinds of the technology? You know, how small are these things? I mean, is there literally like a ballpoint pen that is, you know, capable of recording something?
There's some technology that's classified. So the FBI has a repertoire of technologies. Some of it's classified that you use in national security cases. And where that becomes sensitive is if you're using a technique that isn't in the public realm, and it's a technique that the national security, NSA, CIA, FBI utilize globally, there's a whole process by which you have to get approval to utilize that in court because you don't want to expose it. I'll give you an example. When they killed bin Laden and they grabbed his hard drive, hard drive went to the FBI in New York. Every terrorism charge in the United States he had on his hard drive. He was reading in detail the techniques utilized against terrorism. And so you keep that in the back of your mind that if you have really invasive techniques that are really groundbreaking, what damage do you do by revealing that in an open court? So we generally try to keep the, as we like to say, the national security tool chest away from the U.S. Attorney's Office. We don't even let them see it, oftentimes, because they'll be tempted to want to use it. And in some cases, we will expose it, and then we'll have a lengthy conversation with Washington, D.C. about, do we expose this in a court proceeding? And then what's the likelihood that we will expose it?
Because isn't there a ton of pressure that having that tape, having the words, and of course the video's even better, but without that, how reluctant is the U.S. Attorney to say, you know what, I need you to give me that, bring that to me on tape?
It's a goal, because nothing's better than the words of that person. It's your best shot. Today's culture requires, the standards of proof are growing. And I'll give you an example. We had a jury trial here, I believe, when I was here, and a juror sent to the jury and asked for a technique. He says, why didn't they do this, the spectromagnetic whatever? And went to the judge brought in the defense counsel and the prosecutor and said, what's this technique that the juror's asking about? And they didn't know what it was, so they went to the FBI agent, and we said, there is no such technique. That's CSI fantasy, that's TV. So then the question was, can we tell the juror that? And the judge ruled that we could not, because it would be introducing a piece of evidence that wasn't on the record in the trial. And it was that count that they acquitted on for that particular defendant, because they were led to believe there is such a technique. So the rapid movement of technology is raising the bar in terms of what kind of proof you have to have. It used to be you could have witnesses and some documentation, but you're exactly right. Jurors want more now. And so everybody's striving for that if they can get it, and then if you can't get it, will the U.S. Attorney go to court based on documents and witnesses, all of whom probably have some baggage, and then can they repair them on the stand during the point of their testimony?
But they don't, let's just say hypothetically, you have a politician who's been in power for 45 years. And
Does he like apples?
Let's say hypothetically, I don't know who you're referring to, sir. And this person is very careful and meticulous about what they do. So if I get someone to go up to him with a wire and say, if I do this, you'll do that for me, laying it out for like some jurors a moron, they can't figure out Chicago politics. So somebody will argue, well, he didn't say, I'll take this fee for service. But if you talk like that to a careful lion, that lion will turn and go. You lost that person in that avenue. It's not about like, I'll give you this, I'll do this for you, you do this for me. It's all subtle and layered.
You're right about that. The more sophisticated the corrupt individual is, the less likely it is they're going to engage in a direct conversation of a quid pro quo. It's going to be much more complex, many more layers.
Code word like tuna.
Did we land the tuna?
I'm not going to go with tuna, but yeah, I think the more there's the low-hanging fruit. We used to talk about that in the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI, that you can't walk away from it. You can't walk away from an alderman who basically says, here, give me a pile of cash.
Right.
But you know fully well, like any other spectrum of crime, there's very sophisticated down to most simple, and the most sophisticated are the harder ones to get to and require a lot more work and a lot more determination.
I mean, do you think that Rod would be in prison now if those tapes weren't used?
I don't know. I don't want to speculate. Without question, he knew the wagons were circling around him based on the nature of the case and how it was proceeding in federal court with a number of different people. Whether or not we would have convicted him or not, or charged him, I couldn't say.
Sorry.
All I can say is we were fortunate. We had a turn of luck, put it that way.
I was going to say, was I the only one this week or today when I heard President Trump talk about, well, maybe I will testify in the impeachment case? I thought back to Rod Blagojevich and his desire to get on that stand in his way that he thought, well, I'm a gifted politician and a great communicator, and people love me, and I can talk my way out of this.
Is Sam Adams going to represent Trump? I don't think so.
He'd love to.
Yeah.
He'd love to. I would like to do the thank yous in 2 segments, if I could. Ann Ahern, Dave McKinney, John Kass. Incredible journalists, and our city is better for them, and I hope you support them in their work. The second thank you I want to do is for Rob Grant, because I've known him for many years in this city, and if you think there aren't incredibly skilled, dedicated, hardworking people who care, trying to make the city and country our better place. He's a great example of it, and I know you don't like being in the spotlight, and to come here and take our questions and help us understand the process more is a gift, so thank you. And thank you all for coming tonight. We appreciate it.